in Broken Images by Ayman Nadeem. His skillful hands strung together roses and lilies, piercing through them with a thin steel wire into beautiful floral bracelets of 5 roses and 8 lilies each. Rihan had already made some 7 such bracelets and 13 more were to be made. Anyone watching him would have enjoyed seeing him work the delicate flowers into a final ring and would have admired the beauty of Rihan's hands. His fingers were long and his nails were neat. In fact, Rihan himself was very different from all the children in his neighborhood. Most of them wore untidy clothes. Their hands and feet were dirty. But Rihan would take great pains to keep his clothes neat even while he was out on the street selling his floral bracelets. Rihan was 14, with a heart brimming with seemingly impossible desires and eyes concealing some really big dreams. Only 2 floral bracelets had been sold as Rehan continued to make his way deftly between the cars, persuading people to buy his gajre. The heat was scorching and the air breezeless. At noon in June, the people of Karachi were more interested in reaching their destinations than in Rehan's flower bracelets. Frustrated, dejected, and numbed in his capacity to think, he moved towards a tree to sit for a while in its shade. He felt the sun and the shade were the same, or maybe he had ruled out any possibility of finding a change in his circumstances. Life was losing its meaning for Rayan and he knew it. At 2 p.m., he reported at Azam's car workshop and immediately started fixing a cycle. The hammering and pounding in the car workshop was battering his senses. Earlier, he had always enjoyed his work, whether it was making gajre or fixing cycles and motorbikes at Azam's garage. But ever since he had seen those wealthy boys with fresh skins and mobile phones in a car as he sold them his gajre, his peace of mind was lost. He was not happy with himself and would rebuke himself from time to time. He was on his way home after selling some gajre and finishing his task at the workshop. He sat down on the edge of the pavement, resting his head on his knees, and started weeping silently. Tears rolled down his cheeks, washing some of the dirt off his face and the grime of his mind. It was for the first time that he did not wash before leaving the workshop. He felt it made no difference even if he washed off all that grease and black spots. He would remain a slum boy, an unwanted, random boy in that big city his friends called Kalachi, but he would insist on calling it Karachi. School. Ugh, it was the first and the last place he ever loved in his life. But he was a boy whose father died of hepatitis and whose mother was an illiterate woman who washed clothes in people's houses. So he had to leave the school to earn his bread at the age of 12. Since then, he had managed to satisfy his thirst for knowledge by reading some really good books in Urdu. He used to borrow them from an old man who lived in a library. He would save money to pay the bus fare to get there and acquire some books from this uncle absolutely free of charge. It was almost like a luxurious feast for him, a pleasure which the best foods of Karachi could not provide. But now he hated himself for taking such extra pains only for a book. Darkness was deep and the traffic scarce on the road in front of him. He had been sitting on the pavement for almost an hour and a half. He was crying but knew not why. He felt tormented because he did not know what was it that his heart wanted. It was not the car, the phones, or the money, which those boys had, but something else. What? He knew not what it was. I am a total fool, he told himself. He set off for home, flinging his bag of gajre across his shoulder. Reaching home, he handed over 375 rupees to his mother and headed towards the corner of the room where his bedding on the floor awaited him. He had abandoned eating dinner long ago because he hated the quarrels among his siblings for rotis and salan. He had learned to feel content with the daily lunch at the car workshop. But today he was hungry. He was in anguish. It's just hunger, he assured himself, placing his arms over his eyes, but in his heart he knew it was not hunger. It was surely something else. The following day was no different from the previous one, the only change being that the disharmony in his mind was even greater. He was rebuked too much by his master at the workshop and had a near escape from being hit by a car. Back in school, he was a brilliant student and fluent speaker. He had studied up to the sixth standard in a government school near his home. For Rehan, even a single word uttered or written in the premises of the school had an importance and a meaning. He used to be a different boy as he had overcome the defeatist mentality that prevailed all around him. But then an insignificant thing threw him into an emotional vortex. All of a sudden, he started looking at himself as a victim. Had there been no acute poverty, he would not have left school and one day would have become a teacher. But now he felt ashamed of his own ignorance and of the bitter realization that he would never ever be able to live his dream. It was about after a week later, while he was working in his workshop along with one of his colleagues, Danish, that they both were captivated by the breaking news on TV. The news item said, 11 more die in target killing in Karachi today. Cruel people, commented Danish, who was only 10. Yes, very cruel, said Rehan in a suppressed voice. Danish, yes. Have you ever wanted to go to school? Asked Rehan. No, replied Danish. Why? Because I know it would be useless. But we all need to learn. Yes, school does fascinate me, but I know I cannot go there, said Danish. Can you read or write? Ha ha ha. No, not even my name. You know, it's a blessing to be able to read, because then you can read many good books, Rehan told Danish. Hmm, maybe I have never read one. There was a long silence. Suddenly, Rehan was struck by an idea. If somebody would teach you how to read, would you learn? Inquired Rehan. Somebody? Who? Me, said Rehan. Danish stared at Rehan. All of a sudden, Rehan had become a teacher and he was extremely excited about it. He had kept all his school books safe and intact out of sheer love for them. But today, this act seemed to have a purpose, an important purpose. He was to teach Danish how to read and write Urdu, and he found himself amazingly articulate. Both the boys would sit underneath a street light in a park and would carry on their lessons after the workshop. Rehan was actually living his dream. He had learned a lesson of forcefulness and authority from the sea and a lesson of freedom from the air. He had managed to unshackle himself from the envy and anger, and all of a sudden, life had become serene and good. It was 13 August, and the next day would be a holiday because it was the Independence Day of Pakistan. Both of the boys were happy, happier at the prospect of a holiday than it being Independence Day. After they left the workshop, they decided to skip the lessons and sell some gajre so that they would have some extra money for the next day. They had planned to go to the beach on 14 August. Before parting, they exchanged some words. You know, Danish, you are my very best jigger, said Rehan. And you are my guru, said Danish. They met at a chalk near Liaqatabad in the morning at about 11 o'clock, greeted each other and set off for the seaside before the sun got higher. They had covered about half the distance to the beach when suddenly something heavy struck the walls of the area they were in. They were terrified as a fire broke out caused by the rocket launcher. The next day, the news item was repeated on all the channels. Yesterday, 7 more fell victim to targeted killing in Karachi, including 2 teenage boys who worked at a cycle workshop. Cruel people, said Mrs. Fatima, a housewife living in the defense area. Yes, very crude, agreed her 16-year-old son, who was studying pre medicine at a school.